Well, welcome to Run, Walk, Talk Tales of Inclusion and Development. I'm Judy, and my pronouns are she and her, and I'm here with Steph, and her pronouns are she and her. And last episode, we spoke about getting started with EDI in an organization. And today, we're going to be speaking about how to get started with learning and development in an organization.
I am really excited, Judy. It is your time to sort of share all of your wisdom and knowledge with us. And I'm really looking forward to kind of hearing from you how to get started and how learning and development or L&D works in an organization.
Well, I'm really excited as well. And, Steph, you have experience in L&D as well. So I'd invite you to jump right in as usual if you've got anything that you want to share or expand on.
Great. Okay, so let's get going. First question, Judy, in your experience, what are the key steps that organizations should prioritize when they're implementing learning and development in an organization?
Yeah. Well, I think if we're thinking about key steps, the most key is really to be fostering a culture of continuous learning within an organization. And I think
Mm-hmm.
people say that a lot, and then,
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of like, well, what do we mean by that? What does it mean
Right.
to be fostering this culture of continuous learning? And so I see it as really being demonstrated by an organization valuing learning and really investing in it. So, putting resources and a financial investment into L&D. And this can really be done through traditional modes. I think of, companies who subsidize their education or training for
Mm-hmm.
employees so that people can go take courses externally. I also
Mm-hmm.
see it traditionally being done where, organizations have ongoing internal training sessions that employees can take. And I
Mm-hmm.
also think that it's really about recognizing and understanding and letting employees know that we all have a role in training. So if we think of organizations having mentoring programs or having peer-to-peer learning where people can help each other build skill, it's not simply coming from those of us who are within the L&D function within
Mm-hmm.
an organization. I think it's critical to let people know that we all have a role to play. And I think it also involves really tying learning and development into the business strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really about L&D professionals speaking to the business, finding out what the business strategy is, having a seat at the table so we're hearing about the business strategy. And then we can really look at how do we tie learning and development into performance reviews? How do we make sure that people are accountable for learning? How do we tie it into our, hiring practices so that when we're actually hiring, we're identifying and looking for people who value learning and growth, who have the skills that we're looking for both now and what we're thinking about for future. And then I would just, also say that on my mind these days is, how do we make sure that we have this culture that supports feedback? Because I think having
Mm-hmm.
feedback is so critical for
Mm-hmm.
employees on that learning and development journey, so they know,
Mm-hmm.
where areas might be for improvement and for building skills. And so, having and ensuring that the organization actually supports people. So when they get that feedback, they have somewhere to turn to build skills and so that they can improve.
I really like how you started off with that continuous improvement and almost like the learning mindset, right?
It really comes down to that learning mindset and what we talk
Yeah.
about a lot, which is that growth mindset. So really
Yes.
understanding that it's a journey and throughout our entire careers, we want to be open to learning and
Hmm.
yeah.
That's great. So this lends nicely to the next question around what are you seeing around kind of best practices in L&D?
Well, I think similar to what you spoke about in the last podcast where we were talking about EDI and best practices, I think it's really about incorporating data, right? That's a huge best
Mm-hmm.
practice right
Mm-hmm.
now.
Mm-hmm.
And it certainly starts with, and we've spoken about this in previous podcasts and data, it starts with knowing who's coming to training sessions, but then you want to be measuring if the learning that you're delivering is actually effective, if it's actually having an impact, if it's actually changing the way that people are working, are they using the skills that they're taught? And that's where it's so important to be close to those organizational goals, so you know what you're aiming for with the learning. You know, how long after training are people actually able to be productive, so we can look at measuring things like
Mm-hmm.
time to productivity. I think
Mm-hmm.
also now a best practice in learning is really ensuring that any learning that we're offering is inclusive and accessible. I think
Mm-hmm.
that that's something
Mm-hmm.
that's been thought of for a while now in learning, but I think we're starting to see where people are really thinking about, making sure that the content is inclusive and can be accessed by anyone, or that
Yes.
the content, I'm thinking about building captions into
Yeah.
training.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got different locations where different languages are spoken, making sure that the training meets the needs of your employees. And I think as well, what's on my mind with best practices is really designing training collaboratively with employees. And that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be difficult. It can mean, just piloting a course
Mm-hmm.
and gathering feedback after you've piloted it to make it better, and then really continuing to gather feedback as you're offering the course or the workshop or the program, so that you're continually refining your training.
Yeah, I I really like that piece around the data and the measuring, and also, really tying it back to the business. I think even sort of in that previous question of, I get the sense from you, it's like, don't have this just learning and development strategy that sits off on the side in the learning development world, but it is really embedded in with the business.
It's gotta be. We've got to be looking to where does the
Yeah,
business want to go, and really tying into to what they want to achieve. Like it can't sit on its own.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So what do you see as common misconceptions around L&D? I'm sure you've got many. So
Well, you've
choose a few. Choose a
I'll
few.
choose a few. You've heard me talk about some of these before, and I think that's the first one goes back to what we were just speaking about how important it is to tie what we're
Mm,
doing in L&D into the business strategy, because I see so often that um, people see learning and development as order takers. And
mm,
I'm hearing conversations about this more and more about, we're not order takers, and I'm glad that it's there's starting to be more awareness about this. This notion that people come to L&D and just say we really need a course on XYZ, so create one, and then they disappear and they're
mhm,
expecting L&D to just kind of come up with this course. And I think we're really there as a strategic partner to determine first and foremost, do we need the training? Um, and really look at what is the ultimate, outcome that you're aiming for, because
mhm,
um,
mhm.
training isn't always going to solve the problem. I think that training and learning is often part of the solution, but there's all of these other factors that need to be considered.
Yeah.
And, the L&D team can really help an organization determine this. What do we need in addition to training? Um,
Mhm,
I think that the other misconception is that, formal instructor-led training is the only kind of training.
mm,
Uh,
mhm,
I think that
mhm,
there's
mhm.
not this acknowledgement that there's all sorts of other ways that we can learn, and the formal and the informal ways of learning are equally important. Um, and I think tied into that formal instructor-led training is that there's this expert who's at the front of the classroom
Yes.
instilling knowledge. And it's like, no, like everybody in that classroom, if
Mhm,
we're doing it in a
mhm.
formal instructor-led way, has knowledge and experience to share. And I think that so often I see in organizations, people sort of say, well, if somebody's new in the organization, they go for their training. The trainer
Mhm,
will help them know what they
mhm.
need to do within the organization. And it's like, no, we each have a part in helping people learn about their role, understand what skills are required. We're all in it when it comes to L&D.
And I think, as you were sharing that, it reminds me of this thought that it's like, okay, person or new employee, you go to your 3-day training, full days, PowerPoints, experts at the front, to the that just in time when I need that training, right? That bite-sized learning piece.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
yes, and yes. And you know how passionate I am about this, and people understanding,
Yeah.
and when they're coming for that onboarding, that, they need to own that piece of, we'll
Mm-hmm.
have that content ready for you and you can go
Mm-hmm.
out and find it and we'll make sure it's available. I think that, there's a lot of people now we're seeing coming into the organization where they have that mindset. They're ready to own
Mm-hmm.
their learning and
Mm-hmm.
seek other ways of learning, but it's we're not fully there yet. There's a ways to go.
Yeah. Yeah. So as you're seeing sort of workplaces evolve, what do
hmm
you think sort of what's the future of L&D? What kind of trends should we be aware of? What are you seeing?
Well, I think the trend, and it's going to be a long-term trend that's on my mind these days, is generative AI.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking about it in two ways. I'm thinking about it from the role that learning and development will have in making sure that employees have the skills that they need to work with generative
Mm.
AI in the
Mhm.
workplace.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm thinking about it from the perspective of what are the complementary skills that we'll need. So we'll need to really enhance our critical thinking skills, as an example. And then I'm also
Mhm.
thinking about it from the perspective of its impact on L&D. So if we're thinking
Mm.
about that just-in-time
Mhm.
learning and
Mhm.
real, true, personalized learning where the content is really specific to us and what we need, I'm excited to see as generative AI evolves the role that it can have. So thinking of something like you come into the office and you've got your own personal learning assistant that you can speak to who is guiding you to the information that you need for the day ahead. So it
Mhm.
can give you that
Mhm.
just in time learning, skill
Mhm.
building
Mhm.
when you need it. So
Fascinating. So
mhm,
interesting.
mhm. So I think
They,
that's a space that all learning and development teams should be looking at.
yeah. Uh, I would say, of course, for me, what comes into when I think of the generative AI piece, I worry of the sort of the bias and the who's using it and who's feeding.
Absolutely.
So, you know,
Absolutely. Yep.
but
Yep.
but
And
this
that's
is the way the world is going, and we need to kind of use it, and we need multiple people using it to bring that perspective and the data and those critical skills, right?
well, and what you're raising is so important, and that's why that critical thinking, those skills are going to be so necessary in the
Yeah.
workplace. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I was just starting out, or if somebody who's listening is just starting out, and you have sort of one piece of advice to give them, what would it be?
I mean, I would say, and again, I think it's quite similar to what you said with respect to EDI. Learn as much as you can about our field in both formal and informal ways. If you
Mm-hmm.
can take classes and workshops, there's a lot of free information out there.
Mm-hmm.
Join as many industry organizations as you can. There may be a membership fee, and there typically is, but there's often so much amazing content, so many contacts that you can make to learn from in our industry. And I would also say, there's so many different areas within L&D. There's instructional design, there's learner experience design, there's performance
Mm.
management. And so I would
Mhm.
say,
Mhm.
as much as possible, give yourself a broad understanding of the different areas.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
s- so you have an understanding of our industry as a whole, and then you'll probably start to figure out which areas you're best suited for.
Yeah. That's great. And so also then another question around giving advice
hmm
to so someone who's implementing an L&D department,
hmm
what would be that one piece of advice you'd want to give them to think about within their company when they're implementing an L&D department?
Yeah, well, and again, it's funny stuff because I think it's similar to what you said with EDI. I think it's really about, taking time initially before you do anything
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
really talk to people in the company
Mhm.
and find out, what's required. What skills do they think that people might be missing? What sort of training has taken place in the past, and is it external, and has anybody been tracking what people have been taking? um, I think that you can start to have conversations with functional leaders in other areas. I'm thinking about IT and finding out what sort of technology might be available for the L&D team.
Mm-hmm.
Have
Mm-hmm.
conversations with different leaders within the organization, and again, finding out what is the company's strategic goals over the next 2, 5, 10 years. And then, speak to managers and frontline workers, and, find out how they are answering those same questions. Are they connected to the strategy? Where are the gaps? Do they have the skills that they need? What skills do they think
Mm-hmm.
they need? So I think, similar to you, really um, listening to
Yeah.
what people are saying before you can. There's probably some quick wins you can have,
Yeah.
um, but before you do anything, I think just listening to people, and assessing where the company is currently at.
Yeah. I, that's really great. And I mean, what comes to mind for me is thinking really, I mean, learning and development is this common red thread in the organization, right? Like you can embed yourself in every different business area, department, division, because
Mhm.
everybody's needing that learning. And it really is that partnership. It's no longer like you said, I need this course, go create it, come back 3, 4 months later, deliver it, you know?
Absolutely. And when you're
Yeah.
building those relationships, then people will come to you, and
Yeah.
they'll have, you're really creating those relationships, so that you do have those partnerships within the organization, so that when they're thinking of learning, they think to come to you and talk about how they might partner with you, because we don't always have to be delivering the learning.
Right.
We can
Right.
work with that function subject matter experts. Perhaps they're
Yeah.
delivering the learning. Maybe we've got a
Yes.
blended solution, and they're helping to, like, it's really about forming and these relationships with people within the organization. I think that's key and critical.
Judy, this has been really great. Thank you so much for taking the time to kind of go deep in learning and development. So we were chatting and having this conversation today, I think for me, my action item, coming up this week is to actually spend a bit more time with our learning and development team and find out kind of what their big plans are for sort of 2024 and beyond.
I love that.
So yeah, thanks everyone for taking the time to watch. We'll see you next time.